Welcome, strangers, to this edition of Talkumentary Insider. This is a little bonus feature of our regular broadcast where we get to pick the brains of the people that were involved in some of the wonderful documentaries that we cover on our show. I'm here with Sister Lauren. Hi, Lauren. How are you doing today?
I'm doing real good.
You excited about this episode?
I am. This is cool. I'm excited about it a lot.
Yeah. So if you didn't read the title of this we are here with a very, what I consider to be a it sounds weird to say a special person, but like somebody who, you know, is involved in a documentary that I speak very highly of to everybody that I talk to now.
Yeah, same.
This person co-starred and wrote one of my all-time favorite documentaries now, Hell or High Seas, which we covered for our Veterans Day episode and received my highest ranking out of any of them that I have.
Me too.
Perfect 10. So, so I'm excited to talk to him. He is a writer, documentarian, a sailor who tells stories for a living. He has a PhD in creative writing from the University of Strathclyde in Glasgow, Scotland. So that's a story.
Wow.
Yeah, I know.
Jeez.
Story in and of itself, I think. Wrote a very highly rated book, which I can't wait to get into. I need a copy of this, and I need you to sign one for me there, Stephen.
Yeah, no kidding.
But I'm excited to talk to him about that. He's been a part of making several documentaries, such as Rob Mwandia Runs, PBS's Around Texas, Kathina Hatla Artist, The Making of a Moon Tree, which I really want to talk to you about because to me that sounds really cool. Texas Scenic Views, Yoga for Amputees, A Theology on Health, and my personal favorite and the catalyst for this conversation and the reason for my piqued interest in Stephen and his work. He wrote, produced, and co-starred in the incredible and beautiful documentary Hell or High Seas.
You feel alive out here. You're working with the winds, you're working with the water. You know, she beats you down, but at the same time, she rewards you when that sun comes out. It's just a ray of sunlight coming out over a glacier.
That kid won't give up. He won't give up on anything.
You're not prepared for everything. All you can do is just take the storm and keep on pushing through it. Life is worth the fight.
Strangers, let me introduce you to Dr. Stephen J. Oshea. Hi, Stephen.
Yay.
Hi.
Thank you so much for being here, man.
Oh, yeah, of course. This is a privilege.
Oh, thank you for saying so. I don't know. I feel like we're the privileged ones here, but
I agree.
So when you and I started talking via email, you know, I reached out to both you and Taylor and some of the skeleton crew, sailing guys, and you wrote me right back. Well, not right back. You were using good old Elon Musk's internet from the middle of the ocean on your way to Fiji. Where are you talking to us from now?
Currently, we're back in Texas.
That's home?
Yes. Yeah. Back home.
Is so you in the film Pensacola was home, is that correct?
So that was where Taylor had been.
Okay.
And when we reconnected, I was actually still living in Scotland.
Oh, wow.
Which I wanted to say kudos because you're one of few people who have pronounced Strathclyde correctly in Glasgow.
Wow.
All right.
Good job, Jeff.
Thank you very much.
He's not that much of an idiot.
Yeah. Before we started recording, my sister was telling Stephen how much of an idiot I am. So
in the most loving way possible.
Right. Yep. So you were on your way from Fiji, still doing the sailing thing. And I kind of want to get into this first and foremost. Were you into sailing before Hell or High Seas adventure? Or was that something that came after that? Or how did that work out?
I was only into sailing in kind of like the way that anybody is kind of intrigued by sailing.
Sure.
I had never really sailed before that point. And once Taylor and I started talking, I managed to, you know, get with a flatmate of mine who had access to a sailboat in Scotland. So we got to sail a little bit of the fjords up there.
Oh, cool.
Which, you know, can be really, really great. but also intense and challenging sailing just because you've got the wind coming off of all the mountains and, you know, all the kind of steep slopes up there, but also incredibly beautiful and great place.
I can only imagine. Yeah. So I've done a little bit of sailing in the Pacific Ocean myself.
Different kind of sailing.
But all of my sailing was done as part of a 3,000 to 5,000 person crew on board a nuclear aircraft carrier. So quite a bit different. We didn't use sails. We used a nuclear reactor to get around. Probably more reliable, I would guess, if you've got the crew to man it. But so the adventure happens. You know, you do your stuff with your flatmate in Scotland. You team up with Taylor, and I do Taylor the sailor. I do. You know, I want to get into that relationship just a little bit, but you guys both kind of, you know, went straight into a full kind of life of sailing. I guess, you know, you've got obviously more stuff going on as well, but you know, if when I called you or emailed you, I'm sorry, you're in the middle of the ocean sailing to Fiji, you know, so there's I guess, what captivated you about continuing to do that? I mean, it's one thing to have, you know, I think sailboats are cool. I think I would love to learn how to do it. It's a lot of energy, a lot of things to work, you know, to learn, I should say. But, you know, you did it and then you kept doing it. Is it just something that
like an adrenaline thing, or?
Yeah. Like, what keeps you into that?
Oh man. Well, you know, sailing, it's a really beautiful and humbling experience, I think is the biggest draw for me. You know, you get out on the water. It can be a challenge. There's always things going wrong. Salt water corrodes and destroys everything.
Yes, it does.
So, you know, it's a job, but at the end of the day, you always leave it kind of happier and glad you did it. So that's the big thing for me. And then the trip we were on in particular was one that we had begun talking about while Taylor and I were in Patagonia.
Oh, wow.
And the intention had been to retrace Captain Cook's first voyage from Tahiti to New Zealand.
Oh, wow.
Oh, that's so cool.
So it was just like years and years in the making. And then of course, COVID, you know, it felt like the plan was dead for a while. And then it came back to life. But then Taylor was doing the Ocean Globe race, so he wasn't going to be able to join. And then it just worked out that me and my wife were able to join for this and kind of, you know, be the one constant on that trip. And
wow.
It wasn't ultimately from Tahiti to New Zealand, but we did go from New Zealand to Fiji, to Vanuatu, New Caledonia, and then back to New Zealand and everywhere in between. And it was pretty spectacular. So
it sounds like it. So your wife's into it too. Is she a bona fide sailor, or is that something Yeah.
That was actually her first time on the water, especially open ocean.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
how'd that go? Did she love it, or was it kind of
As you would imagine, you know, it had its perks and its drawbacks.
Sure. Yeah.
She did great. And, you know, she actually, everyone on the boat, I don't know if it's a genetic thing, but I've never gotten seasick.
Me neither.
But everyone else on the boat got seasick that first passage up to Fiji. And I think a part of that is you have the trade winds, but they're building up from California all the way across the Pacific, and the Pacific's massive. I mean, it covers more ground than all of the continents combined.
It's crazy.
And you're just talking about this distance and steady, constant wind, 15 to 20 knots, building up swells. So we were seeing probably on average 10-meter swells all the way up there. And, you know, for those,
your wife is a stronger person than me.
Metric system, you know, that's about 33 feet or something.
Yeah. Yep. Welcome to a measuring system that actually makes sense.
Yeah.
But nobody in America understands it.
But you know, despite the big seas, after a few days, she was great, and then she never got seasick for the rest of the trip. So she got her.
I don't think I would do well on something like that.
Yeah.
Props to your wife, because
Yeah,
Yikes.
I was thinking like if I were to ask my wife to do that, she would probably be super like interested. Like my wife loves nature, she loves the ocean, she loves all that, but getting her trapped on a small watercraft
in
where
the
she has
middle
no
of
way
the
to get
giant
out,
ocean.
I think it would be honey, I think this is something that you would love to do, and I support. Yeah, but I think I'm going to stay here, nervous on the shore.
Yeah, and please
waiting for
call
you to come
me
back. Yeah.
whenever you're
Able to.
able.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the content of the documentary itself, A Hell or High Seas, since that's what brings us together today and got us interested in you and your story. You're an old friend of Taylor's from high school. Is that correct?
Yep.
And were you guys pretty close in high school? Was that something, or just sort of acquaintances, or how did that all kind of pan out?
We drew closer over time because I was a year older. So by the time he joined the varsity team, which they kind of talk about this in the film, he was probably a junior, I believe, a sophomore or junior.
Yeah.
And then that was around the time. So my last year in high school, I was the team captain, and Taylor was kind of up and coming, and he was improving incredibly rapidly. And then we just got really close that last year of high school. And that kind of felt like, a bit of a I don't know how to explain those high school relationships that you make.
Yep.
Especially like on a sports team or something, you feel like you're blood, sweat, and tears together and all that. So what Taylor went on and did in the military was tenfold that. But
wow, yeah.
at the time, that felt like a great bond. And we went 7-8 years without a word, really. He went into the military. I went to college, and then I did my PhD in Scotland. And he reached out just because he stumbled upon some of my writing online. And we arranged for me to make a research trip. So I had my kind of studies was at the time with veterans of post-millennial wars, mostly Iraq and Afghanistan. And Taylor had suggested that there were helicopter pilots in Guam that were worth interviewing.
Yeah.
And that really intrigued me, just a perspective I hadn't talked to before. And then, I think as a writer, sometimes you get people who reach out, and I mean,
everything's worth writing about.
Yeah. And
you should write
it's one
about
of those
me.
things where, exactly. A lot, probably like 9 out of 10 people come at you with, my story's actually really great.
Yeah.
So the fact that Taylor reached out and he wasn't pushing his own story, he was pushing stories of his friends, was really intriguing. And I managed to come down there, and it's like we just picked up right where we left off.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and I feel like that's one that you mentioned the high school relationship, how you feel like this is my brother, this is and then you get into the real world after that, and you kind of go, I really did care about that person, but it's also like, but that was that was almost like a, it was such a pre-life life, like before things really get real. But then, I mean, I've got friends now similar to what sounds like you and Taylor was, then you see them again and it's like, holy shit, we're still compatible as friends. We're still,
you just pick up right where you left off. It doesn't feel like any time has passed.
Stephen, why did, so you mentioned that, Taylor reached out to you about something else kind of entirely. And, but you had already started some of your writing about veterans, and, where does that come from? I mean, you said that you were not in the military. I know that's a big, part. And I want to talk, when we talk about From the Land of Genesis, you even mentioned in some of your, blogs that I've written or I've read about that, how you almost have some, maybe, I don't want to say imposter syndrome, but it almost feels like, what am I doing writing stories about veterans when I'm not one? And, but your take on that and you can speak on this, but I'm telling stories about people, and I'm doing it in a respectful way, which I really appreciate. Where does that come from? Why the interest there? I mean, I know even before I was a veteran, you have the respect for it. You have, and you kind of think it's cool. The military is, something that you know, as a young man, you know, there's pictures of me we've got pictures here from our childhood, and there's pictures of me running around in my older brother's army gear, pretending to be, you know,
Rambo.
Rambo or a soldier. Is there somewhere specific that comes from for you? Like, just speak to that a little bit.
Well, for me, you know, I can't really point to anything in my childhood.
Mm-hmm.
It ultimately came about while I was at Texas A&M, and I was studying writing and English and humanities, and I got involved in a research program about what was at the time kind of coined moral injury within veterans of Iraq and Afghanistan. And it was a couple of academics and a general who were writing a book based on this idea of, you know, combat soldiers going to Iraq and Afghanistan and their understanding of, you know, what is ethical, what is their kind of moral foundation gets cracked or flawed or crushed, you know.
Right. Wow.
But ultimately it led to us interviewing multiple combat veterans who at the time, I mean, a lot of them were my peers.
Right.
So, you know, they'd served 2 years in Iraq or Afghanistan, and they were fresh out of high school whenever they enlisted. And then they're coming back, and I'm hearing these stories, and it was jarring even for me. This was something that I had no idea of, that I felt wasn't being portrayed accurately or even at all in the media. And, you know, we did some digging and we found some good literature. Just, it felt like the message wasn't getting out the way it needed to be. And so that was just me trying to do some good.
Yeah.
Ultimately.
Here's something that interests me that I find to be compelling. And I also have the training to be a writer and the desire to write compelling stories and tell people's stories accurately. You know, it lends itself perfectly. So I think you've done a really good job about that. So you watched or listened to our episode on Hell or High Seas, and I was on that episode with two of my Navy buddies who I met. And, you know, it means a lot when it's portrayed that way, when it's not just, you know, don't get me wrong. I get pleasure in watching the action movie where that's totally blown out of the proportion and it's so inaccurate, but it's fun to watch Chris Hemsworth get shot at, you know, from and whatever. But when it comes down to like a documentary, you want to see, you know, what it's really like.
Right.
And you want to hear stories told in a way that's for someone who was really there or really experienced something like that or is now experiencing something like that. It means a lot. So kudos to you for being able to harness that and to really talk to the source material.
Yeah, and to be that voice, because not a lot of people can eloquently do that.
Yeah. And I am curious though, so you went and met up with Taylor to talk about basically someone else's story. How did it change into maybe we should do this? Let's go on this journey together. How did that conversation start? Did you spark that? Did Taylor spark that? Was that something he wanted? I mean, I know in the documentary it talks about how this is something he's kind of always wanted to do. And in our show, I talk about how that was something that there was something that I wanted to do, never came to fruition in, you know, the way that I had thought, you know, walking across the United States as my sort of odyssey. But how did you approach that? And how did you respond to that going, you know, that's a big undertaking, you know, to say, hey, haven't seen you in 7 years, but you want to sail around the world together?
Very fair question. Well, you know, I think it was a little bit of both of us. Certainly Taylor's dream that he expressed was that he wanted to sail around the world. And, you know, I can't imagine anybody, I guess there are people out there who are terrified of the high seas and everything else, but I can imagine a lot of people who that would appeal to.
Yeah.
Of course, you know, I was like, that sounds amazing. Yeah, of course I'd do something like that. But, you know, there was an element where in the research I'd been conducting, there was this very human vein that was connecting all of my interviews, and that I saw in Taylor, and it was just this sense of isolation and feeling alone and misunderstood that a lot of combat veterans were expressing. And like Taylor wasn't, he wasn't somebody who would just come out and spill his guts on the floor in front of you. It took the whole week I was in Guam, us just having casual conversations. We went and did some crazy things. We did like cliff jumping in an area that we probably shouldn't have. We had some bonding moments, and I just like hearing some of just his raw feedback and some of his experiences. I saw a lot of what I had heard from combat veterans in Taylor.
Yep.
And it makes sense. I mean, he was basically a first responder, you know?
Yeah.
And it suddenly occurred to me that, and Taylor told me this, and he says it in the documentary as well, is just, I think combat veterans are vetted for mental health issues, and just to be able to go into a combat zone, a lot of times you're vetted.
Yep.
And afterwards, of course, it's a new thing. Don't get me wrong. Yeah. It's progress moving forward. But Taylor was never vetted, and PTSD wasn't even mentioned to him in his out process or anything. Yeah. So when I kind of suggested to Taylor that he might be, displaying similar symptoms to combat veterans, it was like
what?
Completely. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, and of course he's in denial of it, because it's, well, I wasn't in combat. That's crazy,
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't want to put myself on the same level as those guys or whatever. But that to me was one of the most compelling things about this documentary, and hearing the stories and all that. And one of the most validating things about it as well is, the fact that non-combat veterans are, more likely to attempt suicide and things like that, and to have struggles with PTSD. I mean, I've got very close people, including people that we met on our show that have, and Nick Josetis, my friend who was on the show with me, he was very open about that he's struggled with PTSD symptoms and all that. And that comes years after, and we were, not in combat, but it's just the way that it changes your view of the real world, and then how shocking it can be to pull, be pulled back and forth. It affects you.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate that's something that you're able to portray through Taylor's story, and then through your guys' story together as you went out. Do you ever consider joining the military at any point?
I don't think I really did.
Yeah.
My dad was he went into the military to pay for medical school. And his whole thing was that he did that so we wouldn't have to.
Yeah.
So
fair.
Yeah.
Yep.
I listened to him. I was that kid.
Well, I can promise
out there who are like, well, that just means I'm going to go join the military now. But,
and that's the fun. We did another episode on a really kind of cheesy, almost like, what do you call it? Like propaganda style, documentary that almost felt like a Navy recruiting video, but it was one that I did with Nick and Dom, the same guys that were on the other episode. And, we were talking about how rare it is to actually meet somebody, if they're being truthful, that says that they joined the military to serve their country, or to be, a lot of that happened after like 9/11 and whatnot. But, most of the time it's, well, I had nothing else to do.
What else am I going to do?
Yeah, I needed to pay for school. My reason was because I wanted to go to school and I didn't want to have student loans. Right. Well, 5 years of my life was worth it to me. And, so it's very rare that I think you get the person that's like
super patriotic reason.
Yeah. But anyway,
especially after the fact, right?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Seriously. Okay. So can we talk about from the land of Genesis just a little bit? Are you
absolutely
okay? Yeah. So this is your book, From the Land of Genesis. This showcases your research and interviews in a way, comes across as very respectful to the people who have served, using their stories and their experiences to tell a compelling story can you tell us a little bit about From the Land of Genesis and where that came from?
Definitely. That started with the research program I was involved in, the moral injury and interviewing combat veterans. And it was like kind of one of the questions we'd always ask was, what was your experience of combat like? And I didn't write those questions, but
did you kill anybody?
Fortunately, that was one of the questions we asked was, which question do you hate civilians asking?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
But, I always found myself more intrigued with the end of the interview, which was, talking about what's your life been like since you got back. And that's obviously something that I could relate to more. But those were also sometimes the most heartbreaking stories.
Yeah.
So it just felt like, that's where I felt like I could actually help, that we could help as civilians. And a big part of that book was this idea, or it was rooted in this idea of the civilian world and the veteran world becoming more and more isolated. If you look at like even as recently as the Vietnam War, there's conscription. A significant portion of the population has that military experience. But today it's been, relegated to like 4%, something like that.
Right.
It's interesting. I mean, it might be 7%. I can't really remember off the top of my head. But the number of people who are enlisted and or veterans is fractional. And we're becoming more and more removed from even people who have enlisted. So fewer of us know somebody who's in the military than ever before.
So patriotism going down, kind of that service mentality where, maybe our parents and grandparents and great grandparents said things like it's my duty to work and to fight for a country and for my family and all that, where we're going away from that, where, the newer generations are saying it's my duty to be an influencer and whatever it may be. So, that's an interesting take. Keep going. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, it's like, for me, that was a big problem because you've got people, the main issue I was hearing from people returning was that they felt misunderstood. They felt completely alone, isolated, and just completely removed from civilian life. And it felt like there was this rift that was growing between these populations. And all I wanted to do was help bridge that and connect those perspectives. And that's where, as a civilian, I'm never going to try and claim that I can meet veterans all the way over. Like somebody who's experienced combat, I'm never going to kind of try and relate to that.
Right.
But I can meet you halfway.
Yep. Yeah, and I can listen to you. I can empathize. I mean, that's something we as humans can do, and I'm not going to judge you based on what stories you tell me. And that can go a long way to hearing someone, because as human beings, a lot of times our instinct is to try to match stories. Everyone's got that friend that doesn't matter what I say, he's done it bigger, he's done it better,
the one-upper.
The one-upper. And that's a lot of times, most of the time, I think that comes from a place of trying to relate, and probably most of the time comes from a good, but it can be really fucking frustrating.
Yeah, it can.
If you're talking about, I was in this situation, and whether it's combat, whether it's not, don't talk to me like what it's like to be here. And it's another thing to say, I don't know what it's like. I've been through something like this, but I'm not trying to compare here.
Right.
I'm just trying to empathize.
Or even to solve anything like that. That's not, sometimes people just need to talk and have you listen instead of offering a solution of some kind. But
right.
Yeah.
And as civilians, like, the least you could do is learn what IED means.
Right.
People slow down and explain that. Or even just like familiarizing yourself to some extent with what the war in Iraq and Afghanistan was like, because it's not like a movie show, it's not like what you've seen on CNN or Fox.
Yeah.
Right.
So, no. So the book has some really good reviews, and one of my favorites says, Quote, "This is my favorite book I've ever read. The prose is strong. No words are wasted. While the imagery is so vividly expressed, I felt like I was a fifth dimensional being observing the story from within." That's a guy named Devin McMurray.
Damn.
So I don't know if you've read that, but that's a pretty big.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that's got to feel good to hear. So anyway, I'm excited to get into this book. Is something I want to read. For our listeners, Stephen's book, From the Land of Genesis, is available online through Stephen's website and unsolicitedpress.com. It's also available as an audiobook and in Kindle format. Hey, who read your audiobook?
I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but it wasn't, it was through Audible that did it.
I was going to ask you if I could do it, and then I found out that it was
already already done.
I'll pay you to let me
read
be,
your book.
Your audiobook.
Yeah, that's
anyway.
awesome. I think I have a credit.
Yeah, check it out. Okay, if you don't mind, we're a little bit over on time, but I do have a couple more questions if you still got time, Stephen.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay,
got to talk about the documentary still. So.
Yeah.
I feel like this documentary, unlike a lot of the ones we watch, really plays out like a film, like a movie. It hits all the good story points. It's a cinematic tale, the hero's journey. It follows the narrative. The hero feels a call to adventure, answers that call, is met with challenges, meets allies and enemies, finds the will to go on, ultimately returns home a changed and transformed person. I mean, this hits all of those notes. Talk to me about the writing and developing process of this story. So how do you, I mean, understanding producing this, how do you write this? What was that writing process like? And how much of that was like just the story kind of writing itself? I mean, I don't want to take anything from your position as a writer, but how much of it was writing and how much just kind of fell into place that way?
Well, a lot of the writing was planning, because
sure, I guess that's true.
Our trip from, sailing around the world is a bit of like a gap year type thing, transformed into what it became, which was, sailing the harshest waters on the planet.
Right.
And that ultimately was born of Taylor's attempt to commit suicide, which is detailed in the film.
After getting out of the military, I was diagnosed with PTSD. And it was pure hell. I ended up putting a Glock to my head and pulled the trigger, and it didn't go off. What am I still doing here? Was it a second chance?
And, I think at that point, this like idea that it was still a dream, it was this dream of sailing around the world. And Taylor and I were still talking, and he, like we say in the film, he'd call me, and his time, it might be 10 p.m., but for me, it was like 3 or 4 a.m. in Scotland. And we'd talk through some of what he was experiencing returning to the civilian life. But it was once he, survived miraculously that attempted suicide, that things became more serious. And this became more about, helping others than it was just a selfish thing.
Right.
And so that's when we kind of conceived the idea to sail around Cape Horn, to document the journey, to make it a documentary that, in my mind was kind of a case study. And Taylor being the subject of that, because another one of the most powerful statistics we'd found, and I think one of the main reasons I really committed to this trip, is that the most dangerous year of any military personnel's life is their first year out of the military. And that's, combat and non-combat together. Yeah. And that's because of veteran suicide. Yep. So, this was kind of like, this was Taylor's Odyssey. A great thing, a great detail about the Odyssey that I think gets overlooked a lot is that the Iliad and the Trojan War was 10 years long, and Odysseus's journey back home was 10 years. So there's this idea of there being a reciprocal, of your time spent in the military and your time transitioning out. And ultimately there's never really a full transition out, you know? No. But for Taylor, I think I felt at that time that the most important thing was just to get him through that first year, you know? And, you know, I definitely had my own personal reasons. I'd just finished my PhD and I had the opportunity to join him into sail, to explore some of these uncharted waters, and Patagonia was on my bucket list, and we got to explore
me
sailboat.
too.
It is now. It's on my bucket list now. I mean, shit, that's fucking awesome. Yeah.
But you know, I think those were the big driving forces, and then from there it was just capturing moments and trying to shape a story out of what we had, which was just, you know, life is incredibly messy. Our journey was incredibly messy. We had hundreds of hours of footage that we'd captured, and some of it was documented on YouTube and Patreon videos just to keep us going. And ultimately it had to be pulled back and shaped and transformed into a story, which fortunately we had the help of Glenn Holston, our director, and the production team at Fresh Fly. Our editor, Vic, was incredible, among many other people. And
Robert
that was
Irvine somehow.
Yeah, exactly. But that was a great experience for me coming out of my PhD and being a writer. Is, you know, I'm used to, you know, you're kind of like in your cave and you create something and then you share it with other people, and then you get feedback and you reshape it and then you share it. But it's a very isolated experience. Whereas filmmaking is so much more collaborative, and you rely on other people so much more. I mean, from the animators to the music composition, all of it is just really, if it's done right, and I think Heller High Seas was done incredibly well.
Agreed.
It was a really beautiful experience.
That and you know, you have a character in Taylor Gregor that is about as charismatic and likable as they come. You know, we were talking about in our show, like, man, I'd get on the boat with them just by, you know, listen to, you know, he's just a very charismatic,
for sure. The charm.
He's got a charm about him, and it'd be hard not to root for him, you know? So you guys out there was a really, really cool story. Are you and he are still pretty close? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. In fact, you know, I haven't actually seen him since he got back from the OGR, but we've been texting. He's due to come up here, and I'm due to go over to Kemah. So we're probably in the next week or two, we're going to bump into each other and get to swap sea stories and everything else. So
awesome.
We talk all the time, you know, whether it's about the film or just life. I'm just really proud and grateful for
you should be.
And where he's gone post Heller High Seas.
Yeah. So I was going to talk to you about your scariest part of the adventure, but you already kind of mentioned that in the film. Being the fight between you and Taylor. So we won't get into that since we're low on time anyway. Can you quickly, before we sign off, can you talk to me a little bit about the making of a moon tree? Because for some reason this really stood out to me when I was reading your what do you call it, portfolio, I guess, of the films that you've done and whatnot.
That's Bedford, old man. Cameras on the surface, and it's been a long way, but we're here.
Later on, I heard about the moon trees, and it was actually a scientific experiment. And so they took about 500 of these seeds, 5 different kinds of trees represented, and they brought them back at the same time. They had an equal number of seeds going through the exact same conditions that stayed on the ground the whole time. And they compared them when they got back to compare the genetics, compare the growth, the germination rates, and all that kind of stuff. And the scientific investigation concluded that the trees that had been to the moon were unchanged. And scientifically, that may be true, but it's also profoundly false because they've been permanently changed. They've done something, you know, just making that trip into space. It's a very, very unique thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the Forest Service reached out to me about that one, and they were planting a tree that was basically a graft of one of the moon trees, which is, you know, back when we were making trips to the moon, one of the astronauts brought seeds to the moon and then brought them back to Earth. So they're not actually seeds from the moon.
Right.
Sure.
Right. Yep.
But, that was just, it felt to me, instead of making the story about a tree, it felt more about the astronaut that I got to sit down with. Mike Fossum is just an incredible, charismatic human being. And, I just kind of framed that story around, the amazing, what can you, there's not even words for it sometimes, what the human venture of traveling to the moon and back, which, it's actually really funny that you ask about that, because just a couple of months ago, right before we went on our sailing trip in Polynesia, my wife and I were invited to NASA, and we're kind of toured around, and we're looking to collaborate further about the return to the moon that's going to be happening with the Artemis missions.
Yeah.
Wow.
So there might be another big story there in development on the horizon. And, it's just
cool.
That's the ultimate, the final frontier. And there are a lot of like bizarre parallels between sailing and space.
Yeah.
Which,
for sure.
If they heard that, might just kind of, tilt their head at. But
I don't know that they would. So, Stephen, I actually work for an astronaut. I work at an Air and Space Museum, and we have a former astronaut as our president and CEO. And we've talked before about some of the similarities of going out to sea and going to space, and just the weird unknown craziness of all that. Obviously, it's two completely different things, but you're right. There is a similarity there, and so I think that's interesting. Besides that, and right before we sign off, do you have anything new and interesting coming up that you want to talk about that maybe needs I don't know, anything cool on the horizon for you?
Well, other than the NASA thing, I have been working with the Forest Service toward a docuseries just about, the group in particular that I wanted to highlight are the hand crew. And they're kind of like hotshots, except instead of skydiving into fires, they just hike. They hike into fires on foot.
Oh, wild.
They camp at night. They fight fire with hand tools and whatever they can find, it's and they're the highest risk. And
my life is so boring.
I know, right?
I have the most boring life on the planet.
My God,
that's amazing.
But actually, I got to embed with one of their units last spring, and unfortunately it didn't end up being like this massive high profile fire. I say unfortunately,
right?
But I got to film a lot of really great content, got to know a lot of these guys, which I think is the most important thing.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Establishing that relationship, and then learning, I don't mean to offend. I don't think anybody would take offense, but their pay is paltry.
Yeah.
It's not what it should be. And they don't get a lot of press, and maybe that's by design. A lot of them are really private people, like the fact that they work for the government, they'd probably balk at. They don't like that.
Yep. Some of the best heroes are ones that don't tout about being a hero. So,
yeah.
They don't want a spotlight or anything like that. Yeah. But at the same time, that's kind of my urge is to help.
Give them a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah. If I can just get them a little bit of a raise or a little bit of appreciation from people who would never think about what sacrifices they're making, leaving their families 2 weeks at a time, just going out in the elements. And in Texas, of course, it's like 6 months out of the year, you're fighting 100 temperatures, and you're not cooling off at night. So there's, heat stroke's a serious risk.
Sure.
There's a lot that they're having to overcome just to do this job that can be thankless at times.
Yep.
So.
Yeah.
And I'm convinced that the people, the men and women who do these, kind of thankless tasks, even if they don't want the spotlight, I think they like the appreciation.
It feels good.
They might, shy away from the camera or shy away from standing in that spotlight, but they're smiling as they walk away, and sometimes, telling people like Lauren and I and the people that maybe watch or listen to our show, about these stories, so we can go, wow, that's neat, that's cool, that's interesting, and those people also get to puff their chest out just a little bit,
right?
You know, just to feel appreciated. I think is really great. Well, Stephen, man, I can't even thank you enough for spending some time with us this evening, and I'm glad it worked out. When we started talking, both you and Taylor were in the middle of the ocean, and now we got, you know, months and months later, and we finally get to sit down and talk right before the holidays. So it means a lot to me that you spent the last 45 minutes with us. Great to actually meet you. You know, it's through a screen and all that, but still. Where can people find you? I'll put some of your links in the show notes, but what are some of your stuff that you want people to check out?
Probably best route is just my website. I'm not a big social media guy.
I know.
So just, but you know, my website is stephenjoshea.com. So that's easy enough. And then
Dr.
honestly,
Stephen J.
you can find me through Hell or High Seas. So
yeah.
If you just Google Hell or High Seas or hellorhighseas.com, any of that, you'll find me. But yeah, I think people should be more directed toward Hell or High Seas. Should definitely watch that. It's free on Amazon Prime if you got a Prime membership.
Yeah.
It's on Apple TV and Amazon and anywhere else you can rent or buy or watch.
Just buy it because you'll want to watch it again.
Yeah. Okay. Well, to you, fair winds, my friend. I hope your next adventure goes very well, and that you keep telling the stories of people, because that's what is important. I think, you know, the things that people do are always going to be great, but when you can hear from those people what that experience was like and what it's like after and before, that to me is where the gold is. That's where the real heart is. So thank you for showing that to the world and for sharing some of that with us this evening. To our listeners, thanks for tuning in to this awesome chat with our new friend, Stephen Oshea. Yay. If you haven't yet, go check out Hell or High Seas. It can be streamed, just like Stephen just said, on Amazon Prime and a couple other places. And then go listen to our documentary episode where I sit down with a few of my fellow Navy vets. We talk about the incredible documentary with Lauren and Matt. Stephen, anything to say before we sign off? Final words?
Just thank you guys for having me on here, and I appreciate getting your highest review ever.
Oh, of course. Yeah, you earned it.
You did.
That was before I knew you. I wasn't buttering anybody out. That was literally
that was truth.
That was literally my favorite documentary I've watched for our show. So
I think I could probably say the same thing. Well, for the show, for sure. Yeah. 1,000%.
Yep. As always, thanks everyone for listening. I hope you keep your minds open and be kind to each other. We'll see you next time. Bye everybody.